This project started about 20 years ago when I first got to the end of Ulysses, and it was the third time I had tried reading it. And I was completely baffled and intrigued, and there was this little map at the start of the copy I had. I thought maybe there's something in this relationship between the text and the real place that is worth studying, and I had this idea that maybe as part of my final architecture training, where we had to write a dissertation alongside the design project, that I could write about Ulysses and about the relationship between thinking and place, the ideas and the real buildings in which the novel was happening, and that this somehow might tell us something about the relationship between buildings and life. The project kind of began in a way with this single solitary word, something which is in translation, and I think the book in that sense is as much about place as it is about displacement, or there's a tension between the two, because we don't have Odysseus or Odysseus in the original Greek, we have Ulysses, so it's already the kind of Roman version. I'm half and half. I'm half Greek, I'm half English, and I'd grown up first in Greece, and then as a teenager we moved to the UK, and I found this somehow resonated. And in a sense we have a replaying of a foundational myth of Europe, of European culture, let's say, but also it feels like we have, all of Europe's history converging on this single day. I wanted to understand what this translation, this displacement, might mean for how we are with buildings. What does it say about being in one place when your mind can roam across the world and through time? And what role does the building play when this is happening? So on the one hand, we have this intricate, minutely detailed portrait of a city where Joyce has gone to extraordinary lengths to make everything feel very specific and very plausible. We have this sense that he almost knows everything about the city, even down to being able to orchestrate these mistakes in the way that characters remember a particular street corner or where a shop is, and there's this fine line between whether it's his mistake or the character's mistake, and in the end I think it kind of doesn't matter because it's about the sense of plausibility that it gives. But what it also does is it invites us to be able to consider whether at different points what type of accuracy and what type of precision we're talking about, and in what way has the setting been incorporated into the story. And Joyce, I think, provocatively created these tables of correspondences between places and ideas, which he disseminated through his friends. They look like they're going to give you all the clues to be able to understand what's going on in the book. But the more you interrogate them, the more it seems like what they've left out is as important as what they include. And in a sense, they are, I think, both a parody of older ways of doing this, so ancient traditions in Western European culture, like the tables of Hermes Trismegistus, where the heavenly and the earthly are correlated. But they're also, in a way, tapping into the human tendency to want to know, to want to explain and to understand. And he's catching us, I think, in that in-between situation of half understanding and half being mystified, and always being caught between those two things. The abstract ideas and the remote horizons of culture and the grand philosophies, it's bringing them more down to earth, I think, and it's reminding us that they come out of a situation of human uncertainty, fallibility, vulnerability. I think that he creates a constantly ironic field of possible meanings where some things have no other meaning and other things are highly symbolic. And so we have a situation where symbolic ideas or concepts arise out of everyday situations and then they recede back into them, and it's a perpetual cycle. It was important to me that it was by a non-architect, because it means that you're forced to look at things in a completely different way. And it's very telling that in Joyce there aren't any of the things that we normally use as ways of generating architecture. So there's no real middle ground between the scale of the city and the scale of the individual, which is typically the rooms and the buildings. and the urban blocks. There isn't that scene setting at all. It's all detail, a series of disconnected, very specific facts. That's how the city and its buildings are mostly conveyed. Even the people are conveyed in that way. A reminder of what's really important in the making of a situation and the making of a place, which is, I think, ultimately what architects do. That there had been lots of research into how Joyce used directories and maps, and particularly reconstructions of the movements of characters around the city. What I wanted to understand was the architecture of these buildings. I wanted to understand how it did or didn't relate to the ideas. And for that, I had to look at it differently. One of the pieces of work that I then undertook was to go back through the text for myself and look at all of the place references differently. So not just noting when a name of a place appears, but noting what happens there, which aspect of the place is actually mentioned, and whether we're actually there or whether we're remembering the place. When I was trying to think how I might make a visual analogue for what Joyce has done with Dublin. On the one hand, I was looking at representations from Joyce's time, so sort of 1920s drawings like the drawings of George Grosz, where you have lots of fragments overlaid to convey the sense of multiple places along the street, for example. And I was thinking, how can I then make that into more of an architectural drawing? So how would I do it in a way that emerges from architectural drawing rather than the work of an artist? And I was looking at these other representations, much older things from, particularly inspired by Frances Yates' Art of Memory, a book where she looks at this tradition of ways of remembering by correlating ideas or words with particular places, either in the room that you're sitting in or the building you live in, or even an area of a city. In the book, what I found extraordinary was that Joyce has obviously decided where to place ideas in the city, but the characters don't seem to be aware of that. And there are similar settings, physically, rooms are arranged in the same way, but then they have new ideas placed on them. So there's a sort of instability about it. There isn't a kind of system which unlocks the meanings of the book. And the city itself isn't a stable symbol. I had to look at all the evidence I could find about each of these locations in Dublin at the time, and I had to try to get to a sense of the topography of the city at that moment in time. And a lot of the places that Joyce is interested in are not places of official importance. Often, for example, he gives characters the addresses of houses that his family lived in, and they lived in, I think it was 19 different addresses in Dublin while he was there, until he was 22 when he left. So this extraordinary peripatetic existence. So there are lots of sub-narratives going on in the selection of places. The city was changing, different parts of the city were changing at different speeds and at different times. So I went through many times trying to unpick this particular pub, for example. Is that photograph of it pre-1900 or post-1900? And then how narrowly can I get to about 1904? I also came to understand that there was a sort of spectrum. We were talking not really about a particular day. We were talking in terms of the topography of the city that in the book. It was really the spectrum of the time during which he was writing. And it involved compiling an archive of, thousands of photographs. And I started to think about how to make a drawing that would firstly capture the feeling of the city as experienced through the book. So it might not be able to capture all the ideas that are flowing through the text as we move through the city and as we inhabit its buildings, but it could do something specific, which is to capture the way in which we experience the buildings and the partial way that we sort of see them, because we get just pieces of buildings appearing as the backdrop to the events of the book. So a doorway, some steps, one wall of the room, a particular corner. it always feels like it's something that's very specifically known, but we're only seeing a little part of it. And I wanted to capture that first of all. So I found this way of trying to redraw the map in a way, so that we really feel like we're in the buildings and in the streets at the same time. And then there was this other stage of drawing, which was reconstructing these 10 very important buildings where most or all of an episode takes place. A lot of people think of Ulysses as a book where people are walking around the city all the time and just glimpsing signs and streets and shop fronts. But that's only one facet of it, and actually maybe 2/3 of it takes place in a single room. Effectively, I rebuilt these buildings that have vanished through drawings, and then I tried to show how much of those buildings do we experience in the book. And the final stage of that was to then try and correlate the reconstructions with the ideas. And to me, that's where it gets really exciting. I worked from every available source that I could find. So fire insurance plans, the archival material that I'd found, old photographs, but also using my skills as a designer and my experience of working with historic buildings and looking at precedents. This process has meant that I've been inhabiting the book, not just trying to picture what all the places looked like, but I feel embodying the confusion of it and the sense that you're always trying to find an orientation to something. You know, you're trying to understand, and it's the process of trying to connect things, trying to correlate, not having got there. That's what this book, I think, provokes you to feel. I think it's important that it isn't descriptive in the sense that it means that we aren't seeing Dublin as a picture, we're really in it. And we're almost reenacting it rather than seeing it as a picture. And to me, that says something important about architecture, because when we design a building, we might have the illusion that we can see it as a whole, but when we experience it, we never do see it as a whole. And we're always in it. And our experience is embodied. And it seemed to me that that was something that was really important to get across, not only to try and convey it, but to, in a sense, live it through this project. I kept asking myself, what is it about Dublin that allowed James Joyce to reenact the Odyssey in this city in 1904? Was there something specific about these buildings and these streets that enabled that to happen? Could Ulysses have happened elsewhere? Could it have been by the side of the freeway in Arizona? Or was there something specific about this town and its structure, its physical structure, that allowed this depth of metaphoric understanding, this richness? I was intrigued by this because I had studied buildings where very complex symbolic ideas were somehow supposed to be embodied in the layout of the building and in its design. But the way in which those buildings were inhabited was very ceremonial and very official. And here was a situation where all of that depth of symbolism and richness of thinking was happening apparently by accident. So I thought, where does that leave architecture? What is the point of design if it happens without us doing anything, or despite what we intend? And in the end, this is what I was asking. How do we not only think about architecture, but how do we think through architecture? How does architecture form a structure through which we try to make sense of the world around us?